Einen wunderschönen guten Abend, liebe Musikliebenden.
Good evening, everybody who loves music, those that miss music.
Mein Name ist Aziza und wir beide freuen uns auf Sie alle hier, auf euch alle hier. Endlich Live-Musik. Yeah. Çayın şekeriyim, biberin acısı uçan kelebek gibiyim. Çiçekte arı, kaynak su gibiyim. Haşlarım kazı, bazen buz gibiyim. Yani bazı dünya yuvarlak ayağımla vura vura. Sıkılırım öf yerimle dura dura. Dünya top, hayat futbol sahası. Şşt ben de oyunculara çay molası.
Yes, it's Aziza. It's the sound of Aziza. So Dave, can you hear me?
It's hard to hear you over the music.
Okay. We are fine here in the room, so we could start. What should I do? Should I start the live stream first and then you open the webinar?
Yes. Why don't we get the live stream sorted out before we open it up in case we have to talk?
Okay, so I will start the live stream for YouTube now. And I'm hoping that I don't need any password. Hast du das Handy mit?
Should be just how you did it yesterday. That worked.
Offside gibt's im Spiel, Offside gibt's auch im Leben. Manche verstehen die Regel, manche nicht, ich verstehe sie nicht. Offside, you are locked up to offside. Dünyanın bir ucu offside. Offside de. Offside, you are locked up to offside. Dünyanın bir ucu offside. You are locked up to offside. Sokarım offside'ını gözüne gözüne ya gözüne gözüne. Hakem elimine sokarım offside'ını gözüne gözüne. Offside. Hayat çaygın şekeri. Hayat uçan kelebek gibi. Çayın şekeri, hayat uçan kelebek gibi. Offside, offside, offside, offside, yeah, offside, offside, offside, offside. Offside, offside, offside, ne? Offside, offside, offside, so, offside, ne? So, genau, diese Stimmung erhalten wir, die ist gut. Obst, kann das sein? Soidee Heißt das nächste Stück? Also ein Rap über Obst habt ihr mit Sicherheit nicht gehört. Premiere? Gratulation. Gut, viel Spaß.
Eder sarışındır içinden bal akar. Yesin kabuğunu dilim dilim, serinlersin şekerim. Sulu karpuzlar yemezsen için sızlar. İçin sızlar ya. Ortasını tadına bak, kenarına at, kenarına at ya. Ortasını üf deme oh de. Hepsini yeme üf deme oh de. Hepsini yeme üf deme oh de. Hepsini yeme üf deme oh de. Soy da ye. Yarmadır şeftalimiz, lezzetlidir her halimiz. Tüylü tüysüz aldırmadan. Önemli olan tadına varman. Önemli olan tadına varman. Eve gittim bir tane, dükkandan aldım bir tane. Dökmeden yiyeceksin, cennete gideceksin. Baharda kızlarda çileklek, günü gelince öpecek, günü gelince öpecek. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme. Üf deme oh de, soy da ye. Apur şupur löpür süpür yarabbi şükür. Al bir de buradan götür, al bir de buradan götür. Hapur supur löpür şüpür yarabbi şükür. Al bir de buradan götür, bir de buradan götür. Üf deme oh de de de de de. Üf deme oh de de de de de. Üf deme oh de de de de de. Üf deme oh de de de de de. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme yeme. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme. Üf deme oh de, soy da ye hele. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme yeme. Üf deme oh de, hepsini yeme. Üf deme soy de, soy da ye.
Dankeschön. Vielen Dank. In unserem Leben geht es viel um Schönheit, um äußerliche wie
Our
innerliche.
life revolves about beauty, outside beauty, inside beauty, and artistic beauty. And that is why I'm going to play the next song for you.
Güzelsin. Du bist schön. Güzelsin. Sen güzelsin. Du bist schön und du bist auch schön. Und hier, ihr seid auch schön. Das kriegt man nicht oft genug zu sagen. Güzelsin, çok çok güzelsin. Yok yok güzelsin. Sen sen sen sen sen. Güzelsin, çok çok özelsin. Yok yok güzelsin. Sen sen sen sen sen. O gözler yeşil, mavi, kahve veya rengi. Burnun her şekli, dudakların çizgisi, yüzünün ifadesi. En önemlisi aynadaki
Hello and welcome. I would like to welcome all of you to the first opening event in the series of Berlin Global Border Experience in the context of the exhibition Berlin Global of the Stadtmuseum Berlin. Before we start with our content, I would like to give you some technical details. At the bottom of the bar in the Zoom webinar, you're going to see different buttons. And one button is a Q&A button. And it is very, very important that we can talk to you directly today. So if you click on this button, you can actually send us your questions and I'm going to be able to see them and I'm going to include them in our discussion. We also have interpreters, male and female. So again, at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a bar. There's going to be a button. If you click on CCC, you are going to be able to see the subtitles. And we also have English, Turkish, and German translation for you. And there is another good button for you, and that is the chat button. Again, you can use this chat button and you can talk to us directly if you have a question or if you also have some kind of challenge that you're facing. Okay, so I am very happy that we are here today. We want to try that. Hybrid is still a very, very interesting field, but of course we are very positive. So before we actually get started, we are going to actually think about the Berlin Wall. The construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961. So 60 years ago, they started with the construction. And today, and over the course of the next few months, we want to talk about visible and invisible walls, boundaries and borders, and how you overcome them. And also how you create connections. We want to talk about personal matters, private matters, public matters, and political matters from the inside out and outside in. All of that sounds very abstract. However, we are going to find stories together that we want to tell. And I am very, very excited that today we actually have lots of reality here, lots of experiences here. We have Turkish-speaking people here, German, Turkish, women of Berlin, who have been important in the past and still are. Today, we are going to get started with a range of different things. We have a film input and a discussion round. So you can see my guests right here. And of course, I would like to introduce them today. And I would like to get started with a clip of a movie by Sema Poyles. And she cannot be here in person today. However, she is here with her movie and her little clip. So you are going to see an interview with this director, author, and actress, Sema Poyles. She was born in Turkey and she immigrated to Germany in 1961. And she studied theater and directing in Munich and also at the German Movie Academy in Berlin. And since 1980, she's been a free author, director, and actress. And part of what she's done is an endless list, to be honest, is very impressive, but it's die Begegnung, Stille Nacht in fremden Land, Selbstbild der Fremdbilder, and die Türhüter, the doorkeepers. The doorkeepers was actually created in 1980 in Berlin, and it was actually based on her personal experiences and meetings with other people. So this documentary is something that she's talking about in this interview, Burcu Argat. And in this interview, it's really all about the experiences of immigrants in Germany from Turkey. So enjoy this clip.
Vor dem Gesetz
When it comes to the law, there's always a doorkeeper, and this doorkeeper is who you meet if you want to enter the law. However, the doorkeeper says that he's not going to let him enter. And the man is thinking about it and says, okay, so should I come back later? It is possible, the doorkeeper says, but not right now. Since the door is open and the doorkeeper goes to the side, he's actually trying to look inside. And when the doorkeeper sees that, he laughs and says, if you really want to see it, you should try it, even though I said no. You should try to get in. But remember, I am very powerful. And I am only at the bottom of everything. From room to room, there are going to be more doorkeepers, one more powerful than the next. And really seeing the third one is something that I can't even manage to handle anymore. Selma Poyas, the director, welcome. So the story of Kafka with the Berlin Mall and connecting both of that. How did you come up with that idea? Well, the story, the doorkeepers, die Türhüter by Kafka is something that I've read years ago, and I thought it was amazing. And when I wanted to create a movie about the Berlin Wall, the story came up within me, and I thought, okay, I really want to use Kafka for that. I really want to use that story because it was very suitable for my movie as well. So I came to Berlin to study, and Berlin back then, the western part of Berlin actually, was definitely a city surrounded by walls. And at that point in time, you could only move around within those walls. And that was definitely something that was very strange, to be honest. And when I then actually got some political problems in Turkey, and I didn't have a Turkish passport anymore, and I also didn't have a German passport, I was actually locked in. I was locked in this part of Berlin. And that was, like I said, surrounded by walls, and I could only move around within these walls. And of course, at that point in time, I had the idea to create a movie about that, a film to show what people have to do, people from Turkey, people who now live in Western Berlin, and how they feel about the wall. Well, I came to Berlin 8 years ago, and I had to leave Turkey because of military reasons. And I asked for asylum. And up until it was recognized, it took 4 years in total. So that means 4 years without a passport. And I really wanted to travel to Western Germany or Eastern Berlin, East Berlin, but I also wanted to know how people in the eastern part of Berlin live. And I actually requested to be able to travel there 16 times, but I was denied every single time. Okay, so how did you meet the main actors? Did you know them before? Yes, some of them are friends of mine, and others I just went out. When I was a student, so I always had to work, obviously, and I mainly worked in the social area, so women working, children working, child labor, etc. And that's why I knew a lot of different people, and I was able to contact them about this movie. So in this movie, we can definitely feel that they all have a shared feeling. All these immigrants have a very similar feeling. And you all seem to actually get used to the wall over time. You seem to have gotten used to it. When we moved here, it was very difficult for me. I thought I'm suffocating. I always had to look at this wall. I felt like there wasn't enough space for me. We used to live in Adabader Straße. Lots of Turkish people lived there, and there was no wall. It was very difficult for 3 years, but now we got used to the wall and we're just living with it. I'm actually used to the wall now, to be honest. I always see the wall when I have visitors because my visitors want to see the wall. And I have different problems, to be honest, with my Turkish passport, for example. Just a couple of days ago, 2 friends of mine wanted to travel to Paris, and they also invited me to come spontaneously. However, I wasn't able to join them because I knew exactly that I'm not going to get a visa from the French authorities. And of course, that is also a wall in my life. Okay, so you make different borders and boundaries your topic as well, that sort of have an impact on your life, like racism and discrimination. That's what you are calling true walls of your life. So do you share this opinion as well? Absolutely, absolutely. So there are visible walls and boundaries, and they're not always the same. However, those are boundaries and walls that you can blow up. Those are things that you can overcome. You can climb over them, and you can also destroy them, etc. However, the invisible wall that is something that is still existing today, overcoming that is a lot more difficult than really climbing invisible walls. And these invisible walls are even thicker now, even higher and even more difficult to climb and overcome. To be honest, in my opinion, in East Berlin, living there is easy. And being in West Berlin, I mean, we can't get in contact with German men because a lot of people hate immigrants. And of course, that also exists in East Berlin, but it's definitely worse here. People are jealous and they think we want their women. And that's why we can't get along. But they really just think that Turkish people are here to have fun. Going out here is cheap. Okay, how do you see the movie today? Is it documenting times or is it timeless? I would say the film is, I think, timeless, I would say, when it comes to invisible walls. And the movie is definitely also documenting time because the Berlin Wall is obviously no longer here, right? Okay, so apart from the main actors without any experience, you also included Selma Ulsa, who is then playing an older woman. Why did you make that decision? Was there anything missing when it came to the other actors who weren't professional actors? Were you not able to tell the story you wanted to tell? Well, I would say since I wasn't able to travel to Turkey for political reasons, our parents always came to Berlin to visit us. And one time, our mother was sitting by the window, she was knitting, and she was looking at me, and she said this one sentence: "I feel so bad for you, Selma. When I'm in Istanbul and I look out the window, I see the mountains, I see the sky, and right here, all I see are just sort of, framed things, framed skies, etc." And then I thought, okay, my mom's not here, so maybe my sister can play that role. It's probably a nice aspect when it comes to Berlin. It's well planned, but it's not enough. If I open the window at home in Istanbul, I see the ocean, I see a clear blue skies. Something's missing in the city, and that makes me tired and depressed. The only reason I travel here is because of you. I don't know when, but one day you will come back to your home. Okay, what's the production like for you? So, did you have to fight harder for your movies than women who emigrated from Turkey? I was the first Turkish woman at a film school. So I actually made features and documentaries about immigrants from Turkey for a long time. But I'm a movie maker. I wanted to make movies. I wanted to tell different stories. And I actually got stipends all the time for what I'm doing with my movies. But the money in order to make the movies was something I never got. So sometimes it's also just boring. It's boring to talk about the same story and tell the 100th aspect, so I didn't want to do that any longer. So I'm now in front of the camera. I'm acting myself. So I turned into an actress. So I sort of switched roles, right? And every single movie, every single series I've participated in, I always have to wear a headscarf and I have to walk through the scene. And to be honest, I don't want to do that anymore. So luckily, what works well now is African American Germans. They're organized now and they're everywhere together and they are requesting things. And to be quite honest, I watch a lot of TV and in every single series, you will see one dark-skinned person. And I do think that is amazing. And Turkish people and Arabic people were never able to do that. I've been living in Berlin for 18 years. Both my sons were born in Berlin. And I am here today to talk about the wall with my children. Usually, when I get visitors from Turkey, that's when I come here in order to show people because they really want to see it. And I really hate the wall. I don't like it. I hate looking at this wall. And yeah, visitors like to take pictures and they look at the Berlin Zoo from here. And I have to say, it's just annoying. It's very annoying because I also work in Kreuzberg. And that's where you see lots of tourists and they also take lots of pictures of us. So one of the actors in this movie is talking about that Turkish women living in Berlin are being photographed by tourists, like animals at a zoo. Was that actually the case back then? Well, when I was still young and I made these movies, there were some travel agencies. They had buses full of tourists from West Berlin, and they were actually riding around. And then pictures, these tourists took pictures of Turkish migrants, took pictures of us, and we really did feel like we were animals in a zoo. And yeah, we're just stared at, pictures were taken, and it was horrible.
Örneğin insanların kafalarındaki duvarlar bence daha önemli. Bu duvarlardan daha önemli.
The walls in people's minds are worse.
Çok
For example, prejudices.
Almanların Türkiye'liler hakkında bir ön yargıları var.
We have to deal with prejudices on a daily basis. Germans against Turkish people.
Mesela Türkler denince Almanların birçoğunun aklına
For Germans, Turkish culture is only kebab and belly dance.
Bu ne derece gerçek? O konuda bir şey söyleyemem ama Almanların Türkleri üçüncü sınıf insan olarak görmelerini doğru bulmuyorum.
They think of us as third-class people. As long as people have these prejudices, as long as they hate foreigners, how are we supposed to live together? Okay, what would you hope the viewers of this movie learn? Well, whether or not they're going to learn something from this movie, I don't know. But one thing I'm hoping for all of us is that we can finally live in a society where there are no boundaries, no borders, no walls anymore. So it's going to be a free, borderless society where people of different nations can come together, they can be friends and actually live together peacefully. Maybe this is just my dream, but dreams do come true once in a while. Ms. Kouros, thank you very, very much for this interview. Thank you. Okay, so this was very, very impressive. It was a good film, and today we are going to talk about it even more. And the interview partner that you just saw in this movie was Burcu Argat, and I'm very, very happy that Burcu is here as well. She's an author, a photographer, and a lawyer from Turkey, and she's been living in Germany since 2016. Ever since she was a student, she's been working as a free author as well, even though she studied law. So she also published some stories and articles in many different newspapers. In 2018, she actually wrote her first book, Berlin Sinfonisi. And the second book, Tanagra, was released or is going to be released in the next few months. So we can actually wait for that. Burcu Argat is mainly focusing on history, art, intercultural politics, and sociology. She's working with biographies, and she's also looking into the questions that are important right now and also historical events, things that are actually a part of her story. So we are going to hear some input about the perspectives of Turkish intellectuals and those that are creating culture in Turkey in regards to the Berlin Wall, and more than that. We are going to hear more about the political connection when it comes to going across borders. So please make sure that you click on the translation button, since Burcu is going to be speaking in Turkish. Burcu, thank you very much for being here today.
Duvarın çöküşüyle birlikte inançlarımız da sarsılıp çöktüğünde artık 80
As a
yaşına
migrant and as a woman, as an individual in today's society is confronted with larger and smaller forms of exclusion, I think today's event is very important. I believe that it's an important contribution to cultural life. There I'd like to thank the Town Museum and the Humboldt Forum. At the beginning of my speech, I used the word exclusion because it's being invisible. That's also a form of exclusion. Also, migrants have, even though they've been present for a long time, as long as the history of Berlin, experienced exclusion and being confronted with being made invisible over many years. One example, the first thing that we see, what we know when we think about Berlin, is the Berlin Wall, this shameful monument that was the symbol of division of the German society. Still, there was a discussion of migrants that were part of this society and lived within these walls. They were ignored, whether this was a conscious process or unconscious. But a country that wants to learn from history has to examine each and every aspect of its society. The Berlin Wall was not only a problem for Germany, it was also a problem for all those who came from Turkey, from Greece, from Italy, Poland, Serbia, Vietnam, and from other countries, many more than I could enumerate at this point, that emigrated or had to emigrate from their home countries. And this problem was not only present in Germany and issue, but also in Turkey. Innumerable people in Turkey have relatives, partners, friends, and loved ones that had lived at one point in time in Germany or are still living here. And the Berlin Wall was thus a topic of discussion for evening talks in perfectly ordinary Turkish living rooms. Clearly, I was very happy when I was asked to participate in today's event. It was very important for me to look in those areas where I am an expert, that's in the Turkish perspective and in a cultural point of view. In my research, which movie, which novel, or which article could be featured, I found the short movie Doorkeepers by Sema Poyraz. I knew Sema Poyraz as an actress, but that she is also a director, I did not know up to that point in time. Fortunately, her short movie ran in the online program of the Arsenal, where I could view it. And I immediately contacted her. So even though she has a lot to do, she took the time to answer our questions. And now it's not just my acquaintance with an actress, but also with a director who I truly admire. The movie by Sema Poyraz gives us an insight into stories from people who, for various reasons, had to immigrate from Turkey. Most of them live in Kreuzberg, which is close to the Berlin Wall. What I found striking in a movie was that almost everywhere you could see the point of view. The real walls exist in the heads of people. They wall us in and they categorize us. And daily we try to overcome these obstacles. Looking at it from the point of view of Turkey, the wall was not just a symbol of prejudice and exclusion, but quite on the opposite side, as a process that we should overcome. The cultural magazine Milliyet Sanat, in its December issue of 1989, had a special dossier with contributions of renowned journalists and authors. In this edition, they summed up the quintessential point of view of the Turkish intelligentsia, and many authors living in Berlin, from Adnan Binyazar to Zeynep Oral, were featured. While Binyazar argues from the point of view of an artist who looks at Berlin from the inside and looks quite wise in perspective on the danger that the fall of the Berlin Wall could impact people who immigrated from Turkey quite severely, that they might even lose their work. And on the other side, Korkut Boratov held to his optimism that when he analyzed the former German Democratic Republic as follows: the Marxists from the GDR have a very difficult time because either they surrender to the capitalism of West Germany or they tear up the shroud and really achieve the desired synthesis from socialism and democracy. In this point, I'd like to look at the reasons why Boratov, as an intellectual who often visited East Berlin and participated in seminars there, as someone who was present with his political stance, and what brought him to make this prediction. The fall of the Berlin Wall was for artists in Turkey who were mainly left-leaning and sympathized with socialism, was the destruction of this utopia, this striving for a better world. This is clearly visible when in Oya Bayada's novel, Turning to Nowhere. From the point of view of her protagonist, a woman who is living in exile in Germany and is granted political asylum, With the fall of the Berlin Wall, our hopes also fell. Not all artists with Turkish roots have such a naive yearning for socialism when it comes to the Berlin Wall. I'd like to thank you for your attention. Please come back to us. And now I'm looking forward to present to you the two other participants in our panel. In YouTube live channel, dear viewers, you can ask your questions in the chat, in Zoom also with the chat function and the questions that you see in the bar below. We are looking forward to your comments. And on my right-hand side, it's Aziza. She was born in Berlin, and Aleph Aziza Yildirim. She's a Berlin rapper, actress, and moderator. And you are one of the early stars of the Turkish hip hop in Germany. Yildirim is the daughter of a 1986 immigrated the Turkish family. She speaks German and Turkish. And at the end of the 90s, Yildirim gave many concerts, was played in the radio, and was present in the German media. And you still have concerts. And someone told me that this August you have another concert coming up in Berlin. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much. To my left, there's Eli Efe. She was born in Berlin-Kreuzberg and is daughter of Turkish immigrants. She studied gender studies and cultural sciences at the HU Berlin and spent time in the US. She had many different jobs as a student aide. She was doing statistics, and with Idil Bayder and Idil Öner, she did a movie. And for several years, you led talent projects as a mentor and was in a Bürgerstiftung, in a foundation in Berlin. And here in Berlin Global, you're a curator here. And for 2 years, you've been diversity agent in 360-degree forum of the New City Society at the Town Museum Berlin. It's wonderful to have you here. And it's great that we can start this discussion now. From the movie, from Sema, we saw that from your input as well, that's a very striking metaphor. That's not just about the physical boundaries that exist that might be easier to overcome, but also the walls that are in the heads of people, dealing with classism, with racism, and all of the borders that are there present every day in the political and public life. And I'd like to hear your associations when it comes to borders and walls. Burcu, I'd like to start with you because you also have Anlass, you quoted him, that talks about the bricks of concrete in our head. And what associations do you have and what walls have you overcome? Well, there are many stories that I could tell. It's endless. But as one example, I'd like to state the first time when I'm in a place, people ask me where I come from. And when I answer that I'm from Turkey, then people say, oh, but you don't look Turkish. We all know that, have made that experience. It's my favorite question, but the answer, it's not my favorite answer. How should a Turkish woman look like? Such prejudice that people have their fixed ideas in their heads. And time and again, we have to every day meet these prejudices and fight them. In the last 5 years, there's been a lot of impact on you in that area as well. And you also said, yes, we know this. And you as a rapper in Berlin, it's quite interesting in the hip hop scene of the back then, but still today, that the physical wall and also other walls are being talked about. How did you grow up? And how did you transport this problem in your music? I think the physical walls, you can see them, you know where they run along, you know why they were created, and you saw them fall. But the walls in the heads, you cannot see them. But you find out, or that you're being confronted with them. And it's much more difficult and more dangerous and less pleasant than having a visible obstacle. And the Berlin Wall experienced as a natural phenomenon because I was in the world and it existed. It existed for a long time. It was a part of Berlin and it did not hurt us. It was more a protection. I knew that beyond the wall, there was a place that was still German, but where you were not allowed to make jokes, because when my father went through transit, when we're at the border, and do not joke and do not laugh. That was what my father said. And we were extremely tense in the car. We looked at the police official at immigration, and it was not funny. And we all took a breather when we were done with this. From East and West, this was my experience. And in hip hop, the wall in my world did not appear at all, because art as such, music, such walls are broken down by music. And there was nothing digital, but there was only TV and radio. And that's how we found out about music and how music was transported, in particular by the GIs who were stationed in Berlin. And we were very rich in this culture. And thus this music was a particular thing to Berlin and in other areas where GIs were stationed as well. But Turkish rap was born in Kreuzberg with the Turkish language as well. And that really fanned the flame of what now exists in the charts. It overcame everything. And also in the walls of the rappers. And there are some walls or borders, if you like, that show us my rules are the following. Rap is this. Rap has to be like that. Hip hop has to be like that. You have to break dance like that. And that still exists, but you are someone who talks about what's in your mind. You do something that comes to you. You are processing your input, and you really talk about it. You put it to words. Oh, this is beautiful. And this is really an empowerment strategy also for the community. Absolutely. You said, as one of the first points, the wall was a given. And we found the quote, we learned to live with the wall. After 3 years, it was normal. And you are the second generation, also grew up in Kreuzberg in Berlin. What was the Berlin Wall like for you as a child growing up? And you said that within West Berlin, there was also walls. How did you experience it? Well, in Kreuzberg, it fell. And back then, I was born in Kreuzberg, and Kreuzberg was the ghetto of the nation. That's what's associated with Neukölln now. But back then, it was Kreuzberg. And Kreuzberg, it was clear that you're part of a social strata of the working class. And thus, of course, you cannot have certain careers, or you were excluded from that. You were not allowed to, or at least they were much more difficult to attain. And at the same time, Kreuzberg today, looking from today's perspective, was the avant-garde of the nation. I was one of the first one who did not have frontal lectures at school. I was in a classroom with 10 different nationalities of different people. They were all born in Berlin, but their families immigrated. So cosmopolitanism was normal. New ways of education. When I could talk normally to my teachers, we were democratic, we were free thinkers. And this was wonderful. And I love Germany for this. And when I came to high school, I should go to Tempelhof because they had a better school there. Then I was in the classroom. Everybody stood up and I remained sitting, and a teacher came in and said, sit down. And I was already sitting, and it was a culture shock to me. Frankly, within Berlin, there were quite different milieus and different ways of life. And that's one of the things you can appreciate about Berlin. And that's what makes this city special and colorful and rich, because it's a fount of many things. Everything comes through here and can be processed. And so Berlin in my childhood was extremely positive. That's fascinating when we think about West Berlin, and that's being said in the movie as well. It was completely encircled. Everywhere, the border was with the wall, and also the Kiez areas of Neukölln, for example, of the different quarters. And you lived just opposite East Germany. And many of the workers and less privileged people lived in Kreuzberg. And it's quite interesting what you're saying, because so many things were created then because the wall was there. It's a question to everyone. I don't know that it's because of the wall, but my daily life consisted in watching the Aktuelle Kamera at 7 p.m. or 7:30, and then we watched ARD, and then the debate started at home. And it was the Cold War. It was permanently talked about. It was right in front of our noses. And I think conflict really breeds creativity, because you permanent had to confront a situation that was completely extraordinary. And at the same point, it was a lived reality for everyone and was quite normal. So it was paradox in that way. And therefore, I think that Berlin was a hub. Many people came here in order to experience things that they could not experience elsewhere, in the anonymity of the walls, in the variety of this city. This wall released much creative potential, and that's quite a paradox result. Musicians came to Berlin to live their music, to jam in the clubs, in the Berlin clubs. So everybody wanted to study this. And I think variety fuels creativity and the parallel societies that existed. I can really develop myself how I want, and nobody is offended by that. What we see in the small places, in little towns, or in West Berlin back then, what was striking, it's, oh, people from Berlin, and that's you guys, you folks. And it's true, there was a different vibe. And I have to say, I'm proud to be a Berlin girl. I do not want to miss this. I thought it was wonderful to grow up. I grew up in Steglitz, so I was not born in Kreuzberg. I was born in Tempelhof in the hospital. I was shortly in Kreuzberg, and then I grew up in Steglitz. And later, shortly before the wall fell, I discovered Kreuzberg for myself, and the creativity and the club scene there, my friends, and everything that comes with it. And we have made pictures at the wall, model pictures, with 18 years old, and then it was gone. It's really fascinating. We see from what you talk about, the view from inside and the view from the outside, and also tourists that came to the wall and that filmed people with their cameras. And you described from the point of view of Turkish intellectual and artists, what was going on. What are your thoughts? What the interesting discrepancy in the view from the outside, from the view from the inside, how things are judged? You want to talk about the intellectuals from Turkey? Yes, primarily, and also your thoughts on it. Not all, but most saw in the Berlin Wall an obstacle, a extreme border between not just societies, but also for a symbol of peace, of a frivolous life. But there were other intellectuals from Turkey who viewed the wall as a symbol of a hope for a better world, for a better future. And they thought, or they believed, that behind this wall, a wonderland was being constructed. And they maybe dreamed of that. But that's what we read, that's what we saw, that artists or creators in Turkey had this point of view. Were there connections with hip hop and music? You also rap in Turkish and in Germany, and you were played in Germany and Turkey. Yes, but all of this was after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that plays a role. Turkish rap in the Turkey exists because it was born in Berlin. It was created here. And here in Berlin, this started. All the idols, the icons, how you want to call them. This was built and created here. And the rap that exists today and is popular, I think that would not exist if, I don't know how many years, is that it's 25 years, right? 26 years, or even longer. May I intervene at this point? But because it was created because the artists and their perspectives that were marginalized in the US, it was easy to identify with those voices. It was not just, yay, everything is wonderful, but it was a time in particular for the second generation who were permanently asked, what are you? And society already had their answer. Exactly. And that made a real answer to that question impossible. And then it started that the second, third, and now the generation now express their opinion. And you truly were the first that started in the musical level to bring innovation. And you took many people with you. I think the basic idea was identity. Because when we started at Kreuzberg, hey, take 1 second. People rapped in English. That was the language of rap. And only later we thought, hey, wait a second, we have another language. Why do we not rap in Turkish? And then that's what started. And German rap started at the same time. And then everybody rapped in their own mother tongue. And when I went to an open mic, everybody rapped in English and German. And then I rapped in Turkish. And all of the Turkish boys came. And this was, language is important. Diversity is important. And I think art always contributes to creating life. Life is reflected in art. And I get goosebumps when I talk about this. It's really fascinating. And that's one of the aspects that's inspired by the lived reality of marginalized people in the US, of the Black, of the hip hop youth that is present across the ocean. We see this in French rap as well, where it comes from the banlieues, from the Maghreb communities. So we see where borders are present. And that's an interesting point of view from art and culture, where the communities that were created, because it's a rhetorical question, but I'm assuming we do not want to be asked all the time who we are, but we want to define who we are. What were your experiences? That I'd like to ask this to everyone. You start. I missed the train a little bit, please, after you. Community. As of course, communities formed. And in Berlin, and that's the fascinating thing, they're not just ethnical, but everything mixes here. And the perspective is always the same. The German nation, those who are not thought about because they have foreign names, because they have different skin color. And that's what unifies them. In literature and also theater, Maxim Gorky, the post-migrant theater, and groups form and organizations and institutions who really carry this identity and describe it as post-migrant, after the fact of immigration, and also the German identity, not as an homogeneous people. And that's, of course, questions what's part of the culture. The pop culture is easier, and the high culture. I work at a museum. We are at a museum here, and the debates are running hot because we're at a point that public institutions have to be opened, and that has to be politically guided, because it does not happen on its own. And this will not happen on its own. So access that has to be broken open. We are here at the Humboldt Forum, and it's a really important negotiation process to really occupy spaces and say, no, we do not want it like that. And that it happens because back then it was not like this. What are your perspectives on how communities arose? We had a feeling of us when we rapped in Turkish and German, and we toured all through Germany. And the Goethe Institute also saw a potential in us as ambassadors and sent us into the world. And that was extremely fun. And I believe that culture and museums and history really understood that, has understood it for a long time, that in some heads that are still geared in the past. And you realize that there's much happening, and there was much happening all the time. The Museum of History, for migration, for music, there's a place. And here at Berlin Global, there's a place. And I see that it takes a long time, a long time. 26 years ago when we started. And the same questions were asked to us then 10 years later, and then 10 years later. And now I no longer give interviews unless it's about the music. And that's a part of the truth. But on the other hand, I'm hopeful, and I'm really looking forward to working and having a community, a faithful communities, and then find other people, become a public happening. That's the most important thing. That's fascinating, to strengthen yourself. When you look at the community from the point of view of the outside, it forces you to look at the community. What are we? How heterogeneous are we as a community? Because we're always addressed as one community. Yes, I'd also like to look at the terminology, because community suggests homogeneity, and it's not homogeneous. A community can only be defined from the outside. From the inside, when you look from there, you see how different people are. There are milieu studies that show that the Polish and Turkish and other communities have similar milieu structures as the German natives society, that has to do with socio-political structures. These structures impact all of us, and it's the same impact on all of us. And when we look at the word community, we do something that we do involuntarily, because we reconstruct communities that in reality do not exist like that. And that can become a problem in the narrative as well. But I believe that the critical measures that you talk about, they can start to, and it's like a fertile ground for that. And when you talk about discrimination in the beginning, where you started about exclusion, and that's the point that we have to debate when it's about your experience and community, the word community. What would you like to share with us? In the past years, many new immigrants from Turkey came to Berlin. And they feel, in my opinion, maybe I'm mistaken, but they feel not at home, as at home, under German people or under the Turkish people who live for a longer time in Germany. That's a situation that not everything can be described as a community. As you said, you can only look at a community from the outside. From the inside, it looks completely different. That's something I observed. And also I discussed this with my friends. But there are differences, also cultural differences, linguistic differences, and also differences in generations. But art and culture gives a new point of view of that. We find a new definition. And you said you do not give interviews any longer unless it's about the music. And the place that you created for yourself as a rapper, also your colleagues, if you compare it from 20 or 30 years ago and now, do you see interesting differences back then and now? I do not see more female rappers, but we are few. And as a Turkish rap community, it does no longer exist. But it really grew together with the general rap community. And I believe that's important to realize. We have to become representative in order to break out from these schema. Idil did not experience the same as I. She grew up in Kreuzberg, I grew up in Steglitz. You were born in another part. And now if we look individually around the room, there are different narratives from different backgrounds, but what we experience is quite similar. I was born in Izmir, the wonderful city of Izmir. What do you believe what we experience? These questions, you don't look Turkish, or when you are at a Turkish person in school, teachers take a while. They take a while until they can properly pronounce your name. So this is quite clear. These are cliches, stereotypes that you're confronted with. And also what it's belly dance, kebab, and hammam are the three things. That's something I would not associate with being Turkish, but yes, that's still the stereotype. These three things still, it's Döner, German most famous snack, hammam, and belly dance, and shisha bars. So shisha bars from the Near East are coming as well. What we can agree on is that we are considered as something else, as other. And I think that's the most common experience in our world, to know that we are different. We are considered as other in a society, and that we are being constructed as being other. And to deal with that is sometimes difficult, and sometimes it's painful because it has to do with discrimination and also with being excluded from certain careers. And that's not a simple thing. We, as we're sitting here, we are established, we have arrived. Maybe you haven't arrived yet. You can say maybe something about that. how you have not arrived, but I know a lot of people who still do not feel as being part of the society, and there are conditions that have to be met to be part of it. As being not from Berlin, one thing that I grew up with, that's, you can say that people who are in Berlin, that I'm from Berlin. And if you feel German, to not talk about that at all, I'm part of a city. That's what you said. Yes, exactly. That's the point. And you can go one step further. The true people from Berlin decide according to which quarter they belong to. Then it's really tricky, because in Berlin, there are many different towns that 1920 grew together to long distance. There's a long duration, and that's what we carry inside us. And people from Berlin talk about quarters. People from Berlin with people not from Berlin talk about being from Berlin. So Berlin is very peculiar when it comes to that. That's why I love Berlin, because we gradually can go more granular in our definitions of ourselves. And we were really formed by this experience when you move to Berlin, and also what it does to the city. When new borders arrive, or people can easily overcome obstacles and borders. It became simple to talk English in Berlin. It opened doors, but when we talk about the expats and get gentrification, and again, people are moved out. Do you see parallels here when looking back over the next 20, 30 years? I speak a lot, so maybe someone else. I feel I've been living in Kreuzberg for 20 years. Kreuzberg was hip back then and still is. It's one of the most expensive quarters now. But the beauty of it, next to gentrification, there are autonomous people who protest in the streets. So in this area, there's still many things going on, and there's so many things going on in Kreuzberg with revolution, with collecting. I think people collect in Kreuzberg from Friedrichshain and from other areas, but people coalesce in Kreuzberg, and I don't know why, but I was magnetically attracted to Kreuzberg, and I think it's bonjour. What's about Kreuzberg? I'd like also to speak positively of other quarters of Berlin, Neukölln, for example. But in general, your question was, what happens to the city when many, many people from different cultures and nations move to Berlin? The European migration, many people from Spain are coming, or Italy. It's much easier for them to consider themselves European. They're more European than people from Berlin. And that makes Berlin cosmopolitan, whether we want it or not, with all of the problems and issues that belong to a cosmopolitan city. And that will not stop. Berlin has this magnetism and this image. And therefore, I'm saying Berlin will remain a fount of creativity. And we have to stay in motion and adapt. And our identities will change and adapt. And there will be a resistance against it. I can understand it because it creates uncertainty. But the sooner you start to accept it, the cooler it gets, and the better the experience of Berlin and your own identity becomes. Wonderful. You have something to add? Yes. As a migrant, I feel welcome in Berlin, and maybe Berlin is the only German city where I can live as free and feel as free. But maybe I could say that I am now a Berlin woman, maybe, yeah. We have one question, and now I need support because it's from Turkish. Please read it out. Your Turkish is so wonderful.
Berlin'e yeni göç eden Burcu Argat ilk geldiğinde Berlin'e özgü herhangi bir zorlukla karşılaştı mı, üstü kapalı da olsa ayrımcılığa uğradı mı, duvarın etkilerini bugün hala hissettiği oluyor mu? Yakın zamanda Berlin'e yerleşme hayali olanlara neler söyleyebilir?
Vielleicht sollte ich darauf auf Türkisch antworten.
Vielleicht können wir kurz mal so eine
Maybe I should answer in Turkish. I can try to translate. So the question is if Burcu actually had some difficulties when she came to Berlin, specific difficulties, and maybe also hidden racism, and also the effects of the wall. Is that something that she can still feel today? And also if she most recently wanted to say something to those wanting to move to Berlin. Is that correct? Yes, yes. Okay, well,
Tabii ki zorlukla karşılaştım. Yani yabancı bir ülke, yabancı bir kent, pek çok şeyin...
the answer unfortunately is in Turkish, so we cannot translate into English.
İşte deminden beri konuşuyoruz. Yani çok renkli bir kent ve yabancılara kucak açan bir kent aslında. Dediğim gibi belki de Almanya'da yaşayabileceğim, yaşamdan zevk alabileceğim tek kent olduğunu söyleyebilirim. Dolayısıyla da çok fazla zorlukla karşılaştığımı söyleyemem bir göçmen olarak. Ama evet, bir takım ön yargılar var. Girdiğiniz çevrelerle de ilgili bunlar. Yani nerelerde dolaşıyorsunuz, kimlerle konuşuyorsunuz, onunla da alakalı. Ama eğer biraz yani kendi köklerinizle ilgili çok fazla probleminiz yoksa, yani geldiğiniz kültürün öğelerini çok içselleştirmişseniz, onları burada yedirmek, onlarla burada var olabilmek hiç de zor değil. Berlin'e yerleşecekleri herhangi yani ne söyleyebilirim? Gelin. Güzel bir kent. Gelebiliyorsanız gelin. Yaşanası bir kent. Hoş geldiniz. Hoş gelirsiniz.
Das war die Werbung, kommt nach Berlin.
Bir de duvarın etkileri, yani duvarın etkilerini tabii ki özellikle bir göçmen olarak hissediyorum, hala bugün hissediyorum. Yani sadece sokaklarda dolaşırken değil, insanların hal tavrı, işte seçtiği sözcükler, yemek yeme tarzları, onda bile gözlemlediğim oluyor. Ama bu benim biraz mesleki deformasyonumla alakalı olabilir, fazla gözlem yapmamla alakalı olabilir. Belki de işte mesleği yazarlık olmayan birisi aslında hiç farkına bile varmayabilir.
Lost in translation.
Danke.
Ja, ich glaube, Teşekkürler. Vielleicht eine kurze Zusammenfassung davon.
Maybe just a brief summary of what the answer was. So being a migrant, of course, I had some difficulties. However, it wasn't huge challenges. And if you have a specific reason for something, a solid reason to move to a different country, then you can overcome any obstacle. Berlin definitely gives you those opportunities. And yeah, we definitely see that. And the Berlin Wall, me being a new person in Berlin, of course, I can still feel it today. That is due to my job, though. Because I'm an author, I definitely look at people differently, the streets differently, everything in detail. And that's why I may be able to still see the wall today. Our exhibition, there is one part where it's all about visible and invisible barriers within the city. And it does remind me of that, specifically when it comes to inclusion as well. So really, where can people with a wheelchair go? Where do they have access? Where don't they? And of course, sometimes maybe people also put up some boundaries for themselves. If you have some experience with racism, if you are Black, if you're Muslim, if you're Jewish, whatever, things where you know you don't go places just to protect yourself. So boundaries that you sort of set yourselves, and that is sort of connected with safety and security. And that leads me to my next question for you. So when the wall came down, that was definitely an unbelievable day. However, it also came with difficult consequences. I'm talking about attacks, and I'm talking about being confronted with each other directly. Who would like to say something about that? Because that is still something that we can feel today. Well, I think directly after the wall came down, I would say that in the beginning, I really only watched that because I thought, what is happening here? Because all of a sudden, all these people around me, they all sort of were either celebrating, and others were saying, oh my God, all my family is going to come here, you know? So it was sort of like, oh, I don't understand. And then I also thought it was quite interesting that I'm not sure how long it lasted. To be honest, I can only talk about my feeling, but for a while, it wasn't all about you stupid foreigners, but instead for a while it was just those from East Germany. And I just leaned back and watched that, and I thought, aha, okay, so this is how things change, right? And yeah, it's all the same. And you have something that you don't like, something that you don't think is good, and then you just show it and you're pointing at it, right? And I think right after that, shortly after that, there were the attacks where you're just sitting down, you're like, oh shit. And now it's all starting with even more power. And I also didn't travel to certain areas of Berlin. I didn't go there. I still don't, even today. And yeah, it's just not something that's on my radar, I guess. And that is what I felt back then. And I was about to speak Turkish, so it's something that's consistently there, you know? It's not something that stopped in any way since then. That's how I feel about it. I felt that it was different, to be honest. So the second day, there was a family from Pahim. They went to visit the aunt, and everyone was like, oh my God. And the aunt was an old lady. And of course, she didn't want to visit, and my mother saw it and she said, oh, why don't you come over here? Come visit us. And then they actually came, stayed with us for 2 days. We ate together, we talked, we exchanged stories, etc. And then afterwards, I actually had a lot of friendships with people who sort of were socialized in former Eastern Germany. And after that, I actually traveled to the United States quite quickly, and we came together there again, being an exchange student. And after that, I actually went there quite often, and I had some bad experience, some experiences that my parents warned me about. And one of them is very, very personal. So that's one of the strangest ones. So I was on a train, and then there were a few people there, women and men, and then they started talking. And I'm just saying like that, they just said KF and things like that. And I'm not going to say what they actually said, but you can imagine what it was. And the worst thing about it wasn't that they said it out loud, but that there were people who actually held on to their bags and locked to the floor. But they didn't say anything, they didn't do anything. And I was 17 years old, and I was really, really scared. And those are experiences where you could have said, okay, you know what, it's really, really bad, but I also have different ones. Of course, I also looked for conversations. Sometimes I met with people from former Eastern Germany, and we talked about who actually is a German now and who's more German, who's been German longer. And at one point, it turned into something fun, to be honest. And I tried to sort of, yeah, make it not so bad. And there were always situations that actually made me ask that question. We're at a point today where at least authors, well-known authors, shared that experience of being an immigrant and being in former East Germany. And of course, the connections between that and the commonalities of that experience in our German history. I would like to add to that. So I have to say for music, the wall coming down was enormous, because all of a sudden, right around all of the eastern areas in Berlin where there were illegal clubs, and then live musicians, live music, all of that was present. All the illegal clubs were opening and we were playing everywhere. And the middle of Friedrichshain were the most common ones, the first illegal clubs, and every week it was somewhere else. And I have to say that was definitely crazy for music and nightlife, and also clubs that came up after, you know, so just the versatility. And I do think that's why we do have electro music, and the E-Werk, Tresor, and all of these clubs actually came up during that time. GIs left, and all of a sudden there was a different underworld, if you want to call it that, and anarchy as well. You know, everybody could do what they wanted to do, and I mean, there were nobody that was monitoring anything anymore. People were experimenting. It was crazy years, to be honest. It was crazy. It was amazing. Crazy time. But for other areas of art, for example, I think it was a little bit different. So those are times that I haven't experienced personally. I mean, I was in Turkey back then, but then I heard and read, so a lot of artists in Western Berlin, they lost jobs or maybe also lost their projects, and they had to discontinue with their projects. So I definitely heard things like that as well. And we were part of that, right? Or was that just a story? No, I do think for immigrants mainly, and also for specific groups, it was sometimes difficult, or some discourses weren't done like that anymore. So while in the 80s, we were still talking about the vote to write and things like people coming to Germany, etc. So all of a sudden that stopped, and it was something that was handled within Germany, and we were one country again, and we needed others to sort of define ourselves. And the fact that this is not going to work, I mean, we do see that today, and that's why the question would be, okay, what are we then? What are we when it comes to this global life and versatility? And not only when it comes to identity, of course, there are many differences that we define ourselves by. And I think in Berlin, we're a little bit more progressive. We have the most prominent anti-discrimination law, I have to say that, and I'm very, very proud of that, to be honest. And diversity dimensions, or diversity is something that's protected against discrimination, and how that actually plays out in reality. Of course, there's still room for improvement. However, I would say it is something that's anchored. We do have that claim in our city to really have the versatility protected and respected. And we have to be definitely structured when it comes to that. And of course, the fact that that's not implemented fully is good, but having that as a claim and having that part of our law is definitely a big, big step. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and that really shows that there is still a process. Berlin is definitely claiming things, and that is very positive. It's dynamic, though. It's not stopping, though. It's probably not going to stop either. It'd be sad if it didn't remain to be Berlin. And I have to say, being from the Western Germany, that perspective, you can always say Berlin is not Germany, right? So that must be based on something. Very, very interesting. One last thing I'd like to mention for the last couple minutes. Please go ahead, ask your questions in our chat so that we can implement them and ask them to our speakers today. And other than that, we do have taken a look into the past. We have that link to today. And I would also like to take a look into the future, or tomorrow, and maybe also talk about if you could really imagine where we're going to be in 20 or 30 years. What comes to mind? What do you want for Berlin? What do you want for yourselves? For Germany, for the world, because Berlin is carrying it to the outside world. Who would like to get started? Are you asking for our dreams or our hopes? Everything. Or our imagination? Really everything. Everything that you just mentioned. Well, if I'm out in Berlin, not only in Kreuzberg or Wedding or Neukölln, but really everywhere in Berlin, I hear a lot of different languages. And that is something that makes me very happy, because then I may feel like I'm at home even more. I feel safer. And because of this versatility and because of this fun, that is what's making Berlin even nicer in the future. That's what I want to believe in. Okay, if we talk about the cultural scene and music, well, for Berlin and also for the museum landscape, I would say that it is going to happen in 20 years' time. There are going to be institutions for specific reasons. So today already, I would say that almost 50% of those that are below 6 years old have a migration background. So people in Berlin, 50% of them have several identities. So this monocultural idea is something that is going to change anyways. And there's going to be something new that's going to arise. And of course, that's also going to have to be visible in situations like museums, theater, music, literature. So that's going to happen because that is what people are all about. And of course, my professor once said that language is changing with those that are speaking, and the same holds true for culture as well. And of course, you can think that's good or bad or whatever, but it is going to change because people are changing. I'm just thinking about it. I'm just thinking about it myself. And to be honest, I'm hoping for a lot of different things and versatility when it comes to people. And I'm with you and I'm with you. And when it comes to music, I'm also hoping for versatility as well. I'm hoping that clubs are going to grow and stay here. And I'm hoping that Berlin is going to keep its flair, the flair that we have today. We just hope that that keeps blooming. That's basically it. And I definitely don't want, well, I'm just going to tell you what I don't want. I don't want any setbacks. I don't want to go back. That's what I'm hoping for. And that's what I'm hoping for Berlin. Back where or back to what? It's just developing backwards, whatever that may be. So I just wanted to keep growing, keep blooming. And because of the versatility and friction and everything that it has that makes it special, all of that should just stay. And that's what I'm hoping for Berlin. That's how I see Berlin in 20 years' time. My child or children all should be able to grow up in a world where whatever we represented is something that they can take for granted and they can make whatever they want to out of it and what they see and want. That is really, really nice. And I think this is really the perfect final sentence. So specifically when it comes to all the criticism, which is very, very important. And when it comes to really making all of the chances and opportunities a topic as well. So we all know what we're working towards and what we're hoping for. So it's so surprising that this format is so unique, where German and Turkish people and people who are originally from Turkey, they actually talk about the wall. They're talking about their experiences and sharing their experiences with us. So thank you so much. And hopefully there's going to be more in the future, specifically also about the communities and really talking among different communities and asking about how did you experience it? What was it like for you? So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you very much for participating, for being here today, for your beautiful stories. And of course, thank you very much to Sema. If you're watching today, thank you very much for your beautiful film and the interview, to all the technicians, all the people who participated and contributed. And I would like to also mention that Berlin Global is also on social media, so don't miss anything because there are 2 more events when it comes to boundaries and borders in general. And the next one is going to happen in October and the next one after that in November. So thank you so much. Thank you very much for watching today. And please feel free to leave your comments and see you next time. Maybe we can wave in the camera.